I was speechless when I saw my wife arrive with her lover at the company's couples meeting. It wasn't just any meeting. There, around the table, were our closest friends, colleagues with whom we'd shared barbecues, trips, and intimate secrets. The room, with its yellow lights and minimalist decor, froze around me. A shiver ran down my spine when I saw them enter hand in hand, as if they were a real couple, as if I'd never existed. I rose from the table, my body feeling like it weighed tons, my muscles trembling with indignation and disbelief. I crossed the room and, standing before her, with my face still and my voice controlled, simply said, "I hope you understand the choice you made." I turned away without looking back. Inside, something had died. That night, I didn't go home. I drove for hours, aimlessly, with my suitcase thrown in the back seat and my head imploding with thoughts. Every curve in the road seemed to draw a part of the pain I carried in my chest. The image of her smiling at him, the way she'd smiled at me years ago, played in a loop in my mind. I wondered, how could someone who claimed to love me humiliate me like that? And more, why do this in front of everyone? Why make public a betrayal that could have been ended in silence? She didn't just betray me, she exposed me. She emptied me in front of witnesses. She stripped me of my dignity with a smile. I left. Gone. I vanished without a trace. I changed my number, my city, my routine. I started over in a place where no one knew my name, where no one knew my story, where I could relearn how to be myself without the shadow of the woman who destroyed everything. And it was in this new beginning, when I least expected it, that I met someone. It wasn't an overwhelming passion, the kind that promises eternity in a week. It was a mature, silent, and gentle love. A love born of patience, care, and listening. A person who didn't need to compete with ghosts, because she had her own light. And it was this light that, little by little, rebuilt me. Months passed, and I finally felt my soul returning to its place. I no longer woke up angry, no longer felt the weight of humiliation on my shoulders. I could smile again. Talk about the future. Make plans. And then, just when everything seemed stable, I received the news that she, the woman who destroyed me, came looking for me again. Desperate. Saying she still loved me. That no other man had ever cared for her the way I had. That she'd made a mistake. That she'd lost herself. That she wanted me back. Her voice on the other end of the line sounded torn, as if the world had turned against her and I was her last chance for fresh air. When we met, I saw in her eyes what I'd never seen while we were together, genuine regret. The tears flowed uncontrollably. Her hands trembled. Her gaze was dull. She confessed that her lover was an illusion. That everything she'd imagined living with him had evaporated in a few months. That he'd left her. That he'd laughed at her. That he'd mocked her feelings. And that now, she realized everything she'd lost. "No one has ever cared for me like you did," she said, her voice breaking, her eyes fixed on mine, as if hoping that, by magic, everything would go back to the way it was before. But in that moment, I was no longer the man she'd betrayed. I had become someone else. Someone who had learned to love himself, someone who no longer accepted half measures or crumbs. I took a deep breath, looked into her eyes, and said firmly, "I forgive you for what you did, but now I'm moving on." And she collapsed. Her legs gave way, and for a moment, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She realized, finally, that forgiveness wouldn't bring reconciliation. That what was broken could no longer be put back together. That the choice she'd made in the past, that night at the couples meeting, had sealed the end of everything. She stood there, watching me leave. And I left with a light heart, certain that self-love, once restored, is non-negotiable. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that fate still held a final irony. When I returned to the city months before that reunion, I reconnected with someone from the past. A woman who, years ago, had been part of my life, but who walked away without explanation. At the time, I was married. She was single. Our paths crossed briefly but intensely. There was a silent chemistry, a mutual respect, but never betrayal. Just a what if, tucked away in the back of my mind. And now, there, upon my return to the city, it was she who reappeared, more mature, stronger, more alive than ever. A woman who knew my story, my pain, my scars. And yet, she chose to love me. What my ex-wife never knew, and perhaps never will, is that this woman from the past was her former best friend. The same one who was our wedding's maid of honor. The one she pushed out of her life out of sheer envy, insecurity, and fear of being overshadowed. Years later, she reaps the fruits of the contempt she sowed. Her ex-husband is in love with the very person she made a point of excluding from her world. The reunion between us? Oh, it happened. And it was unforgettable. But to know how she discovered who my new love was, and what she did when she found out, we need to go back to the beginning. The night of betrayal. The choice she made. The price she paid. And the ending she never imagined she'd experience. Because sometimes, life doesn't punish with tragedy. It punishes with elegance. With the silent pain of seeing what was lost, forever. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize or justify cheating. All the stories you hear are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are real. Our purpose is clear, to show how infidelity erodes bonds, destroys homes, and forever scars the betrayed. Prepare now to dive into a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Take a deep breath, the truth begins to be told. They met at a business event at the end of summer, when the heat had not yet subsided and the days seemed longer than usual. She worked in the marketing department of a multinational technology company, he worked in strategic development at a respected consultancy. It wasn't a romantic encounter, nor worthy of a movie script, but there was something in the way their eyes met, perhaps a silent curiosity, perhaps just the right timing. Amanda had always been a practical, methodical woman, quick-witted and with a measured smile, the kind who rarely gave in to impulsiveness. Gabriel, on the other hand, exuded a serenity that was captivating due to his lack of haste, the way he listened before speaking, and the way he looked into someone's eyes as if he wanted to understand more than what was being said. The relationship began discreetly, blossoming without fanfare, almost like a routine that solidified naturally. Close friends noticed how he made her laugh lightly, as if she allowed herself to be more vulnerable around him, and how he seemed to light up in her presence, even without grand gestures. There were months of coffees on rainy afternoons, conversations that lasted until dawn, and short weekend trips that seemed to rediscover the world through the simplicity of being together. When they decided to move in together, it wasn't on impulse, but out of a mutual certainty that what they had was solid enough to share the daily grind, the silences, the bills, the boring Sundays, and the long-term plans. The apartment she chose was in a quiet neighborhood, with large windows and a balcony that she quickly decorated with plants, glass lanterns, and mustard-hued pillows. Gabriel loved the view that opened up at dusk, when the sky turned a mix of orange and wine. There, the two created a home that wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. With their synchronized habits, their eye contact, and their conversations about the future. Amanda loved cooking while listening to jazz while he organized the books on the shelf. On weekends, they read together in the living room, sometimes exchanging chapter excerpts as if they shared more than stories. They were accomplices. Or at least, they seemed to be. Amanda has always sought balance. She grew up watching her parents in a marriage without outbursts, but also without great affection. She promised herself that if she ever loved, it would be intensely, but without losing her reason. Gabriel came from a different background. The son of passionate and chaotic parents, he understood early on that emotional stability was a rare luxury. So when he found consistency in Amanda, he knew there was something there worth cultivating with care. They both admired each other not only for who they were, but for what they awakened in each other. She became sweeter, more flexible. He became stronger, more confident. Time brought them closer together through a shared social circle. Dinners with colleagues, couples get-togethers, casual late-afternoon encounters. They were seen as a model couple among their friends, mature, respectful, and well-adjusted. Amanda, with her elegant posture and sharp wit, aroused admiration wherever she went. Gabriel, always kind and polite, seemed the ideal man. They were invited to lectures, company events, and corporate trips. There was an aura of admiration surrounding them, as if they formed a harmonious, unbreakable duo. Over the years, their relationship underwent subtle changes, as it does for all. The intense passion of the beginning gave way to a quieter affection, a trust built on 1,000 small daily decisions. They argued little, and when they did, it was with respect. They learned to compromise, to understand each other's limits, to value simple gestures. Amanda began to become more involved in the company's creative projects, taking on larger roles with more responsibilities. Gabriel maintained his centered approach, but quietly found himself more distant from his domestic routine. He began working later, frequenting other professional environments, and dealing with different pressures. Still, nothing seemed to threaten the foundation they had. There was a time when she used to write short notes and leave them in his coat pocket. He, in turn, collected these notes in a hidden box in his closet. Small traditions that were lost over time. But the respect, the attention to detail, the evening conversations on the balcony, all of it remained. It was a mature love, and to outsiders, an enviable relationship. Neither seemed to have any reason to question what they had. Amanda remained vain, but without exaggeration. Gabriel was attentive, though quieter than before. There was a melancholy that was beginning to subtly set in, but neither of them could pinpoint exactly when it began. They still laughed together, still made plans, still talked about future children. They still shared coffee in bed on lazy Sundays, watched old movies cuddled on the couch. They had a playlist of their own, with songs that had left their mark. They had too many memories to simply ignore. Amanda, with her heightened sensitivity, noticed something had changed, but preferred to think it was just adulthood taking its toll, as it does for everyone. Gabriel, on the other hand, carried a restlessness he couldn't name. Sometimes he'd look at Amanda as if searching for something and couldn't find it. Other times, he'd watch her sleep and feel a guilt he couldn't quite pinpoint. The routine continued. New work trips and commitments arose. Couples get-togethers continued to be frequent, as did dinners with friends. At one of these gatherings, the couple was chosen to represent the group at a prestigious corporate event. Amanda, with her natural talent for communication, took on part of the organization. Gabriel, with his strategic expertise, was responsible for facilitating the contacts. It was a period in which they spent more time together, and for a brief moment, it seemed they were reconnecting. They went out at night again, made plans for the next holiday, talked about renovating their bedroom or changing the living room furniture. Small details that brought a breath of fresh air. But what Amanda didn't know, and couldn't even imagine, was that behind Gabriel's serene gaze lay a whirlwind of internal conflict. Confused feelings that had been simmering for months, perhaps years. Stifled doubts, stifled desires, unspoken words. And what Gabriel also didn't know was that Amanda, despite her apparent calm, was already beginning to feel a distance that was hard to explain. She tried to hold on to the good times, the memories, the future plans, unaware that something deeper was driving them apart. And yet, there was no betrayal, no exposed lie, nothing that could be clearly identified. Only a fog, a cold breeze that was beginning to blow inside the house, invading the corners of her soul. Their story, up until this point, was made of shared silences, silent complicity, and dreams that still seemed possible. But what neither of them knew was that fate was already preparing a turning point. That there was a moment about to happen, an instant that would put everything in check. A scene that would forever change the way Amanda would look at Gabriel. And the way he would face his own conscience. Because some choices seem small, until the moment they collapse everything around them. And what was about to happen would appear at the most unlikely moment, in front of the most unexpected people. And when it happened, there would be no going back. Now that everything seemed calm, that the noises had fallen silent, that routine felt safe again, life would deliver its most accurate blow. And when it came, it wouldn't be with shouts or arguments. It would be with a look, a presence, a subtle detail. It would be with someone entering a place they should never have been. It would be with the feeling that the world froze for a second, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The company's annual event was approaching, and with it came the expectation of an elegant and representative weekend. Amanda was one of the main organizers, having dedicated weeks to choosing the venue, invitations, menus, and decor details. The chosen venue was a sophisticated space with indirect lighting, glass walls, and skyline views. Everything seemed aligned with the standard of excellence she demanded of herself, not only professionally but also as a couple, because that night, all eyes would be on the couple who, in the eyes of their colleagues, represented stability, trust, and success. Gabriel, while a little less enthusiastic about the show, remained discreetly supportive, helping with the preparations and, above all, being a confirmed presence by her side. Amanda chose a navy blue silk dress, understated yet elegant, and Gabriel wore a dark suit she had chosen weeks earlier. As they entered the venue that evening, they looked like a framed portrait of harmony and mutual respect, and indeed, for a time, that was exactly how things seemed. During the first few hours, they chatted with guests, took photos, danced briefly to the hired band, and toasted with the couples closest to them. Amanda was excited, if a little tense about the final details. Gabriel, always composed, maintained his serene demeanor, though his gaze was more absent-minded than usual. A few times, she caught him scanning the room as if waiting for someone to arrive, but decided not to comment. He had learned not to control everything, and he trusted enough not to create ghosts. Gabriel, for his part, felt the weight of a growing unease. His chest weighed down with a discomfort that mingled with shame and anticipation. Several times that night, he considered giving up, making an excuse, and leaving town the next day. But what was about to happen was already bigger than him, like an avalanche that needs only a whisper to crash down a mountainside. While Amanda chatted with some marketing colleagues near the bar, Gabriel received a short message on his cell phone. He took a deep breath, looked at her from afar, and hesitated for a moment. It was as if a part of him begged for an exit, any loophole that would prevent him from moving forward with what he had planned. But he did. He walked down to the side entrance of the room and stood there, hands in his pockets, his posture almost indifferent. Minutes later, a woman emerged from among the guests, wearing a bright red dress, her hair tied in a flawless bun, and a restrained smile on her lips. She walked up to Gabriel, touched his arm familiarly, and he, whether out of impulse or weakness, responded with a welcoming gesture, subtly guiding her into the room. Their return to the room didn't immediately attract attention. Most of the couples were focused on their own conversations, and Amanda, still involved with the organizing team, didn't notice. Gabriel walked beside the woman as if carrying a truth on his shoulders, still trying to feign lightness. There was tension in his movements, a discomfort visible to anyone observing closely. Time seemed to slow down as the inevitable approached. Amanda turned casually to look around, and within seconds, her entire body froze. Her gaze found Gabriel. Then the woman beside him. The two of them walking together like an intimate couple. And it was in that instant, silent, brutal, without scandal, that everything fell apart. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked toward him with firm steps, as if she were stepping onto a bridge about to collapse. The people around her began to fall silent one by one, creating an uncomfortable silence. Amanda stopped before them, looked at the other woman's face, then at Gabriel. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but she interrupted him with a short, dry sentence that cut through the air like a razor. "I hope you understand the choice you've made." No tears fell. No further words. She turned and walked toward the exit, her dress billowing, her eyes fixed somewhere ahead, as if her dignity were the only thing still holding her together. Outside, the air felt colder. She paused for a few seconds before calling the car, her legs feeling weak, her stomach churning, her heart crushed by a disappointment so thick it didn't even allow for immediate despair. It was as if there was still no room to feel. Only to process. When she got home that night, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat on the couch and remained there, motionless, staring into space. The words he hadn't said hurt more than any confession. The silence, the cowardice, the way he'd walked into the living room with another woman as if it were legitimate, as if she were nothing, that was what hurt. More than the betrayal, it was the contempt. The feeling of being discarded, replaced, ignored. She spent the night awake, mentally reviewing all the ignored signs, all the small absences that were overly justified, all the excuses that had once seemed plausible. There was, indeed, a distance. A silence between them that had been growing, but Amanda believed it was temporary. That it would be overcome. Now, she saw clearly what she hadn't wanted to see. Gabriel had stopped being with her long before that night. The difference was that now, his absence was palpable. Official. And she didn't know how to return to a life where he no longer existed. In the morning, before sunrise, Amanda got up. She walked through the apartment like a visitor. She observed the bookshelf, the coffee maker, the framed photos, the stacked books. Every object seemed to mock her. She decided then that she had to leave. She threw some clothes into her suitcase without much logic, just grabbing what she could find. She took a deep breath in front of the mirror and, not knowing exactly where she was going, set off. The road seemed longer than it was. She drove aimlessly, simply following the instinct to escape, to put miles between herself and the pain. Meanwhile, Gabriel remained in the city, but silently. He received a few messages from mutual friends, few dared to ask him directly. He didn't respond. The woman he'd shown up with that night didn't stay long. She left after the event, without ceremony, without promises. Gabriel found himself alone, in an apartment that still bore traces of Amanda in every corner. Her absence was glaring. And what once seemed like a choice of freedom now felt like a sentence of loneliness. The following days were shrouded in silence. Amanda didn't answer calls, didn't respond to messages, didn't give any sign of anything. Gabriel tried to reach out to her once or twice, but didn't pursue it. He didn't know what he had to say. There was no justification that fit it. He knew he betrayed not only her trust, but everything they'd built together. And yet, the betrayal hadn't happened overnight. It was the result of progressive neglect, of an emotional disconnect he couldn't, or wouldn't, face. Amanda, meanwhile, wandered through small towns, staying in discreet inns, trying to reconnect with herself. At first, she felt nothing but exhaustion. Then, anger came in waves. Anger at him, at herself, at life. Over time, grief gave way to introspection. And it was on one of those days, walking through a hidden garden in the center of a tourist town, that she felt something different. A shy peace, a desire to start over. And it was also in that place that she met someone. A stranger who listened to her without judgment, who offered silence when she needed it and laughter when the weight became unbearable. Gabriel continued living, or trying to live, amidst memories and regrets. The days passed, but the image of Amanda leaving that night never left his mind. The words she spoke kept hammering in his mind like an echo impossible to silence. He hoped time would ease the pain, but he discovered that some wounds don't heal with time, but with confrontation. And he wasn't ready for that yet. The reunion between the two would happen months later, unexpectedly. And with it would come the revelation of something Amanda never imagined, the identity of the person who now occupied the place that was once hers. But before that, Gabriel would have to face something even more devastating. A truth that was about to emerge. A secret buried behind the betrayal. A detail that would change everything. It was late afternoon when Amanda decided to return. Not to make amends, not to forgive, but because she had reached the limit of silence. The lack of answers hurt more than the betrayal itself, and even though she knew the reunion could open new wounds, she needed to look into Gabriel's eyes one last time, not seeking explanations, but to end this with the dignity he had tried to steal from her. The apartment door was ajar, a familiar scent still lingering in the air, mixed with the faint scent of cigarettes. He had started smoking again, she realized. Each step she took inside was like walking through the ashes of a burned-out story. Gabriel emerged from the hallway without a trace of alarm. She had expected this moment to come, sooner or later. He watched her with heavy eyes, showing no sign of surprise, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. It was Amanda who broke the silence, coldly asking if he was even aware of the humiliation he had caused. He nodded, saying yes, that he knew exactly what he had done, and that there was no justification. She approached slowly, her eyes full of hurt but firm. She said that what hurt her most wasn't the betrayal itself, but the fact that he made it public. That exposing her like that in front of everyone was cowardly, inhumane. Gabriel agreed, murmuring that he didn't expect her to forgive him, or to return. But Amanda wanted more than a shallow confession. She wanted to understand why. He hesitated. He took a deep breath, ran his hand through his hair, and paced the room as if searching for courage on the floor. Then he stopped in front of her, his eyes fixed on hers, and told her that what she'd seen that night was just the tip of something that had been there for some time, fueled by the very anger he hadn't known he was carrying. He said he felt suffocated, emasculated, as if he were merely a functional cog in a life she'd single-handedly constructed. Amanda laughed, a bitter laugh, wondering if he was really trying to justify the betrayal with a speech of unresolved resentment. Gabriel tried to explain himself, saying it wasn't an excuse, that it was an attempt to understand himself. But Amanda didn't want to understand any more. She was there for closure. Or at least, she was until he mentioned a name. Hearing him, Amanda paled. Her body froze, her expression hardened. It took her a few seconds to breathe normally. She asked, her voice trembling, if he was joking. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He sat on the sofa, head down. When he finally spoke, he confirmed that yes, it was true. The woman he'd shown up with that night wasn't just a coworker, nor a stranger. She was someone Amanda had known for a long time. Someone she loved, someone she trusted. A figure from her past who had been ripped from her life by a painful and unexplained breakup. It was Clara. The same Clara who had been her childhood best friend. The same Clara who had been her maid of honor. The same Clara she'd cut out of her life years ago because of a misunderstanding that had never been resolved. Amanda felt her legs weaken. He sat on the arm of the sofa, trying to process the information. Gabriel continued, his voice low, almost a whisper. He said that the reunion between him and Clara happened by chance. That she showed up at a lecture he attended, weeks before the company event. That they started talking without intention, but little by little, a strange connection emerged between them. That he didn't know who she really was at first. And that when he did, he was already too involved. Amanda asked, through gritted teeth, if he slept with her before or after finding out she was his former best friend. He didn't answer. Silence was answer enough. Amanda stood and walked to the window, her eyes brimming with tears. He said everything made sense now. The scattered glances, the uneasiness, the distance that had grown between them in recent months. He said Clara had been a shadow in his life for a long time, that their friendship ended because of an emotional betrayal, not a physical one, and that she had never fully gotten over it. And now, seeing her own story repeat itself at the hands of the man she trusted most only reinforced how cyclical the world was in its cruelties. Gabriel tried to get closer, asking her to understand that it wasn't planned. That he hadn't sought Clara out with ulterior motives. But Amanda interrupted him, saying that what destroyed her most wasn't cheating on any woman, but on that one woman. The only one she never imagined could reappear in her life. Gabriel then explained that Clara had also been alienated from her own family because of their past. That he always spoke of Amanda with admiration, guilt, and longing. That there was a connection there that he never fully understood until it was too late. Amanda stared at him with a look that mixed disgust, sadness, and exhaustion. He said the betrayal itself was a difficult hole to climb out of. But what he did went deeper. He excavated the most fragile part of his memory, poured salt into an old wound, and made it present. He said that if there had been hurt before, now there was revulsion. Gabriel lowered his eyes, knowing there was nothing to say. He tried to justify feeling emotionally abandoned. That he had felt invisible for too long. Amanda then lost control, saying he had 1,000 opportunities to speak, to ask, to complain, to say anything. But he chose the dirtiest path. That he preferred to remain silent, swallow the discomfort, and then return it in the form of venom. Tension rose in the air like a storm about to break. Amanda stood, grabbed her purse, and said she didn't want another second in that place. That the man she knew died the moment he decided to hurt her with such precision. She said Gabriel hadn't just destroyed a marriage, but also her self-image, because now even her memories were tainted. Gabriel followed her to the door, saying he was sorry, that he just wanted to rediscover his worth, that he'd lost himself, but that now he saw everything clearly. Amanda turned, her face already wet with tears, and said she didn't want his regret. That he could keep it, along with the emptiness he'd sown. And before leaving, she concluded by saying he'd destroyed his own future. That she, at least, still had the strength to rebuild hers. The hallway seemed longer than it was. Each step Amanda took was a step away from everything she'd experienced. When she reached the street, she took a deep breath, feeling the cooler air hit her face. A strange relief mixed with pain. She knew this was the last time she would see Gabriel. And I also knew a new chapter was about to begin. A chapter where she would no longer be a supporting character in her own story. A chapter where the truth would finally emerge definitively, and with it, the most surprising part of all, the true reason behind Gabriel and Clara's reunion. A revelation he himself didn't yet know, but one that would change everything he thought he understood about love, guilt, and loss. Amanda didn't return home that night, nor the next. She traveled far, driving for hours with no clear destination, until she found a small coastal town where no one knew her, where glances held neither judgment nor memories. There, she stayed in a discreet inn with a sea view and simply decorated rooms. For the first few days, she avoided all contact with the outside world. Her cell phone remained switched off. Her eyes, brimming with tears, stared into the salty horizon outside the window. Anger no longer came as an explosion, but like a tide that rose and fell silently, leaving a trail of despondency on her skin. Gabriel had touched the deepest wound she carried, resurrected a past she had struggled to bury, and at the same time, proved that the person she trusted most was capable of descending so deeply into her fragility without hesitation. However, more than that, there was something Amanda still didn't understand: why Clara had agreed to be a part of this. Why, after all, would she choose the only man Amanda had ever truly loved? And that was the answer she needed to get. On the morning of the 5th day, Amanda turned on her phone. Several messages were waiting. Some from friends, some from work, but one in particular came from an unknown number. It was Clara. The message was brief, simply saying, "Can we talk? You deserve to hear from me. When you're ready, let me know." Amanda held the phone in her hand for a few minutes, debating whether to give in to more pain, more disappointment. But she knew she needed to face what was still pending. Not for Gabriel, but for you. She called immediately and, in a firm voice, said she would accept the meeting, but on the condition that it be in a neutral location, far from the city, far from the past. Clara agreed. 2 hours later, they were face to face, in an empty beachfront cafe, with the windows open to a cloudy sky and waves crashing against the rocks. Amanda didn't say anything at first. She just watched. Clara was visibly dejected. Her eyes were sunken, her hair unkempt, her face makeup free, as if carrying the weight of many sleepless nights. When she finally began to speak, her voice was low and shaky, as if still gasping for breath to justify what seemed unjustifiable. She said she'd never imagined meeting Gabriel again. That she'd seen him at a conference months before, and that, initially, she'd only been surprised to learn he was still with Amanda. That there was no intention of getting involved. Amanda listened silently, her fingers intertwined on the table. Clara continued, saying that, as their conversations progressed, she began to feel something strange. A connection that didn't make sense. And that when she discovered he was her ex-husband, she was in shock. She considered walking away, but at the same time, there was something in her that begged to stay. Amanda took a deep breath and, in a voice colder than she expected, asked, "Did you fall in love with him just for him, or was it because he was him?" Clara hesitated. The question hit home. She said she didn't know how to answer. That perhaps she had sought in him a way to repair what she had destroyed before. That perhaps she had longed to be loved by someone who reminded her of the life she had abandoned. Amanda swallowed the answer bitterly. She understood that Clara had never loved Gabriel completely. She had loved the reflection of unresolved guilt. But then Clara paused for a long time. And there, amidst the silence, she said something Amanda hadn't expected to hear. She told him that the reason she'd gotten close to Gabriel hadn't been just a coincidence. There was a darker motivation behind it. She revealed that during the first few months of their conversation, she hadn't known Gabriel was her ex-husband, but soon learned from a mutual friend who worked at the same company. And that upon finding out, instead of walking away, she decided to stay. She said she still carried a huge wound from the time Amanda had shut her out of her life, and that she'd harbored resentment for years. Amanda's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Clara confessed that, as absurd as it seemed, she'd convinced herself she needed revenge. Not just for what Amanda had done in the past, but for what she felt she'd lost. She said the idea of getting close to Gabriel didn't arise as a conscious plan, but as an irrational impulse to hurt the person who had hurt her. Who allowed herself to experience it as a form of power, even knowing how dirty it was. Amanda felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't cry. She just looked at Clara with calm contempt, like someone who finally understands that certain voids will never be filled. Clara began to cry, saying she regretted it. That she'd gotten more involved than she should have. That she saw something in Gabriel that made her forget her original motive. That she'd come to truly like him, and that this had destroyed her even more. But Amanda no longer felt compassion. He said everything made sense now. That Gabriel had betrayed her out of cowardice, and Clara, out of revenge. That they deserved each other. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and simply said, "Thank you for being so clear. More than ever, I'm proud to have left you in the past." And she left. In the following days, Amanda never returned to her old apartment. She asked a trusted friend to pick up her things. She moved to a different neighborhood, a different pace, a different life. She began therapy, enrolled in a creative writing course, and began frequenting new places where no one knew her. And it was during this process of rebuilding that she reconnected with someone she never would have imagined. In a chance encounter at a bookstore, she bumped into an old college friend, someone she had lost touch with but who had always sparked a quiet curiosity in her. The reunion was light, natural, without promises, but full of new possibilities. They began talking, then going out, and little by little, Amanda realized that love wasn't the property of those who hurt her, but an opportunity to rediscover herself alongside someone who saw her without the shadow of any past. Gabriel, for his part, sank into a heavy silence. Clara left him weeks later, saying she couldn't bear what it represented anymore. She said his presence was a constant reminder of her own shame. And she left. Alone, Gabriel tried to rebuild his routine, but nothing felt right. The books lost their meaning, the music became muted, the faces on the street seemed to judge him without even knowing it. He tried to reconnect with Amanda months later, when he learned she had returned to the city. He tried writing, calling, reaching out in person. Until one day, he saw her walking through the park, hand in hand with her new boyfriend. She was smiling. A light, full smile. Gabriel approached, hesitantly, and called her name. She turned, surprised. He said he needed to talk to her. She calmly asked him to be brief. He began to speak, saying he had made a mistake, that he had lost himself, that he hadn't known how to appreciate what they had. That no one had cared for him the way she had. That he missed the cafe with jazz, the balcony with books, the peace she brought. Amanda listened in silence. Then she looked at him with serene but unwavering eyes and replied that she forgave him. That she no longer felt hatred or pain, only gratitude for him showing her who he was before it was too late. She said she was already moving on. And that now, she was happy. Gabriel lowered his eyes, murmured, "I understand," and walked away. Amanda walked through the park beside her new love. And inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Freedom to love without fear, to trust without reservation, to smile without guilt. And as the sun began to set in the golden sky, she knew, with absolute certainty, that their story was over. But that her life, after all, was just beginning. Gabriel walked the streets without a clear direction, as if searching for something he knew, deep down, he wouldn't find. Amanda's face, with that serene, steady gaze, still echoed in his mind like a definitive sentence. There was something in her posture, an irrefutable dignity, a silence filled with strength, that dismantled him more than any scream could have. Seeing that genuine smile on her face, next to another man, was like witnessing the symbolic burial of everything they once were. There was no room for hope. And yet, it was there, in that inevitable outcome, that the true weight of his choices began. Gabriel felt, for the first time, that loneliness wasn't just the absence of someone, but the constant presence of someone gone, leaving behind a trail of memories that were now his alone. He returned home, looked around, and saw the remnants of a life that no longer existed. The box containing Amanda's notes remained in the same place, but now, every word written there seemed to mock him. The affectionate phrases, the spontaneous declarations, the written plans, everything he had ignored, out of pride, out of fatigue, out of cowardice, was now evidence of what he had destroyed with his own hands. In the days that followed, Gabriel withdrew into himself. He avoided his friends, the places they went together, the habits they shared. He began living on autopilot, frequenting anonymous cafes, walking streets where no one recognized him. He began writing as a way to understand himself, filling pages and pages without intending to show anyone, simply trying to reorganize the internal chaos. It was in this deepening of his self-discovery that he began to face a truth more uncomfortable than all others: he never truly knew what love was until he lost someone who truly loved him. And more than that, he never understood the weight of trust until he betrayed it. There was no way to erase what he had done. There were no words that could reshape history. And he knew it. He knew that, even if Amanda one day completely forgave him, she would never look at him the same way again. Amanda, in turn, was relearning how to live. There was something profoundly liberating about no longer having to conform to the expectations of someone who had stopped seeing her. At first, it felt strange to walk alone in places she had previously frequented as a couple, but over time, she began to feel whole again. Little by little, she rebuilt her support network, strengthened old bonds, and created new ones. She invested in herself, in her career, in projects she had put aside. The new relationship blossomed slowly, calmly, unhurriedly, filling spaces that were still healing. The man by her side demanded nothing of her beyond the present. He didn't compare her to anyone, didn't ask her to forget the past, simply offered his presence. And that, in that moment, was all she needed. Even so, there were days when memory invaded uninvited. It was impossible to completely erase such a long history. In moments of silence, she remembered details that no longer hurt, but still weighed heavily. The smell of coffee, the music they loved, the way Gabriel looked at her in those early years. Thinking about it wasn't wishing for it to return. It was simply acknowledging that certain scars remain, even when they no longer hurt. And over time, Amanda learned to respect those scars. She didn't try to hide them or disguise them. They were part of who she had become. One day, she received an email. It was from Clara. It didn't ask for forgiveness, it didn't beg for reconciliation. It was a confessional, almost a goodbye letter. Clara said she had left the country, that she was trying to rebuild her life elsewhere. She said she understood if Amanda never wanted to hear her name again, but that she needed, somehow, to fully accept her guilt. She revealed that, even when they grew apart in their youth, she had always harbored envy of Amanda, for her intelligence, for the way people admired her, for the way she was effortlessly loved. And that this envy grew until it turned into hurt, resentment, and, finally, revenge. She said she had gotten involved with Gabriel not out of love, but because she wanted to hurt Amanda in the most intimate way possible. And that now she understood how sick that was. Amanda read the letter to the end, unhurriedly, without interruptions. When she finished, she remained silent for a long time. And then, instead of responding, she simply deleted it. That wound had already been healed. No more explanations were needed. Clara was part of a story that would never be told again. One morning, while sorting through old papers, Amanda found a notebook she used early in their relationship. It contained travel notes, decorating ideas, and recipes they'd tried together. He read a few excerpts with a small smile, then closed the notebook and put it away in a box. It was no longer a painful memory, but a marker of where he'd been. And it was necessary to remember where you'd been to know where you didn't want to return. That same day, she went to lunch with her new partner. They talked about future plans, discussed ideas for a new project, and laughed together. He held her hand and said he admired the strength with which she had been reborn. Amanda smiled. She didn't see herself as strong. She saw herself as someone who survived. That week, Gabriel also made a decision. He put the apartment up for sale. The place was too heavy with everything that was no longer there. He decided to travel for a while, with no fixed destination, just to escape himself. Before leaving, he visited a park he used to frequent with Amanda. He sat on the bench where she had last told her she was moving on. And there, he wrote a final letter. Not to give it away. Just to release it. He wrote that he loved her. That he always would. But that he now understood that love alone was not enough without respect. That he wanted, from the bottom of my heart, for her to be happy. And that if she ever read it, she wanted to know he finally understood. Folded, the letter was tucked inside one of the books they used to read together, discreetly left in a donation box at the cultural center where they met. Life, as always, went on. Each of them carrying their own truths, their lessons, their losses and small victories. Amanda knew she would never be the same. But now, looking in the mirror, she saw someone who had not only survived betrayal but who had chosen not to carry the weight of pain as an identity. Gabriel, for his part, was still searching for peace. He was still stumbling over memories. But for the first time, he began to rebuild his life from responsibility, not denial. He understood that his actions had shaped not only the end of the relationship, but the man he would become from then on. And it is at this point that the story gradually repositions itself. Not as a fable about lost love, but as a true portrait of choices, consequences, and growth. Because the true moral dilemma that remains is this: who are we when we destroy what we once swore to protect? And even more, are we capable of rebuilding ourselves with dignity, even when we lose what we loved most? The answers may not come clearly. But it is in the questions that transformation begins. And for Amanda, this transformation was, finally, irrevocable. Time passed with a different slowness for Gabriel. Gone was the urgency of shared commitments, daily messages, and the small rituals that gave rhythm to their life as a couple. The mornings were long, the coffees were solitary, and the sound of the kettle whistling seemed louder in the silence of the empty apartment. He had sold the property but postponed moving until the last second. A process of letting go that hurt more than he expected. Packing his belongings was like facing his own ruin in pieces, the still-framed photograph forgotten in the hallway, the note tucked inside the poetry book, the silverware she had enthusiastically chosen one Saturday morning. Every detail was a cruel reminder of everything thrown away by a weak and cowardly impulse. Even as he tried to rebuild his life, there was a part of him that knew he would never reach the same level of fulfillment he once had with Amanda. She was the only one who knew him completely, and yet, she loved him. And that was precisely what made everything even more unbearable. The day before the move, Gabriel received an unexpected call. It was Amanda's mother. The voice on the other end was firm but cold. She said she wasn't calling to relive the past, but because she felt it was only fair to tell him that Amanda was about to release her first book. Gabriel swallowed hard. The news hit him like a blow. She had resumed something she had always dreamed of, and which he, through inattention and selfishness, had never truly encouraged. Her mother even commented, without irony, that perhaps it had been born of grief, a way of transforming loss into something fruitful. Gabriel thanked her, his voice choked, and hung up, unsure of what to do with the information. He stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes, feeling like the world was spinning around Amanda while he simply sank to the floor. The day of the book launch arrived without him knowing whether or not to attend. For hours, he walked the streets as if trying to convince himself it no longer matters, but before he knew it, he was standing on the other side of the sidewalk, staring at the brightly lit bookstore where people were crowding. He didn't go in. He just watched. Amanda was there, amid hugs and smiles, signing copies, listening to praise, being celebrated. She wore a simple white dress, but there was something in her posture that overshadowed any vanity. She was serene, confident, whole. When her eyes crossed the window and saw him across the street, there was a moment of pause. There was neither surprise nor contempt. Just a slight nod, as if acknowledging the past but no longer clinging to it. Gabriel nodded back, and for a moment, he felt an aching peace. He crossed the street in the opposite direction, determined not to invade her space with his shadows anymore. While Gabriel left for a new city, Amanda experienced freedom like never before. With the book published, she began to be invited to interviews, literary events, and lectures. She became a reference for silent overcoming, not by making a spectacle of pain, but by transforming her learnings into words that touched other women. Her chronicles spoke of new beginnings, self-care, and difficult choices. She never mentioned Gabriel directly, but attentive readers sensed the invisible presence of a real story hidden between the lines. Still, Amanda maintained a low profile. She preferred to let readers see themselves in the pages, without assigning blame. It was at one of these events that she reconnected with Isabella, a renowned editor who had been a college classmate. The connection was immediate, but what Amanda didn't expect was to discover that Isabella had read her book and was moved by one of the most difficult passages, the one about the night a love was destroyed by the silence of the one who should have protected it. They sat in a cafe after the event, and there Amanda shared, with a mature and light tone, the behind-the-scenes story of what she had experienced. Isabella listened attentively, without interrupting. Then she said she felt the story hadn't been fully digested yet. That there was something there that Amanda still needed to put into the world, not to reopen wounds, but to close them once and for all. She suggested she turn it all into a play. A different format, more direct, more visceral. Amanda laughed, saying she wasn't a playwright. But Isabella insisted, she didn't need to be. She just needed to be honest. In the following days, Amanda thought about it a lot. She reread her chronicles, rearranged scenes in her head, rewrote dialogue. And thus, without pretense, the outline of an intimate play was born, centered on a couple who lose themselves in their home, who stop looking at each other, who betray themselves not only physically, but in the small absences of everyday life. She sent the text to Isabella, who cried when she read it. He said he was ready. And then, months later, the play opened. The premiere was modest but impactful. The room wasn't large, but it was full. The lights were low, the set minimalist, the actors dedicated. When the story reached its breaking point, there was absolute silence in the audience. Amanda watched from a discreet seat, feeling every word reverberate in her heart. It wasn't about Gabriel, nor about Clara. It was about her. About all the versions of herself she'd been forced to abandon in order to survive. At the end, when the curtain closed, there was a commotion. People sought her out to hug her, to share their pain, to thank her. And among so many faces, she saw one she hadn't expected. Gabriel's mother. A discreet woman, with a restrained voice, who watched her with teary eyes. She approached slowly and, upon meeting Amanda, simply said she was sorry. That she never knew how to comfort her, but that she had always considered her a daughter. Amanda held her hand and replied that she understood now, some pain no longer needs explanations, only closure. The two embraced, and there, something closed definitively. Gabriel learned about the play by chance. A friend he still kept in touch with told him. He considered seeing it, but decided against it. He knew he couldn't bear to see his guilt played out in front of dozens of people. But he read all the reviews, watched the available excerpts, and silently felt pride. Pride that she had reinvented herself, even if far from him. He spent the following months traveling, seeing new places, trying to shed the image of the man he once was. He wasn't seeking redemption, because he knew he didn't deserve it. But he tried, at least, not to repeat the same pattern. He began working with young people on social education projects, began writing more often, and began looking people in the eye. He had relapses, memories, longing. But he also had, for the first time, awareness. Amanda, in turn, received an unexpected invitation to give a lecture on literature and emotional resilience. The event was to take place in another city, one she usually avoided because of the memories. But she decided to accept. She felt ready. She prepared her presentation carefully, spoke lightly, and answered questions empathetically. At the end, while organizing her materials, she heard a familiar voice in the background. It was him. Gabriel. Thinner, quieter, but different. He excused himself to speak with her. He said he hadn't expected to see her, but was glad to have had the chance to hear everything she had to say. Amanda thanked him. He then asked if he could offer her a coffee. She hesitated. She said she didn't think it would be good. That there was no more room. Gabriel agreed. He said he wasn't expecting coffee, nor a conversation. He just wanted to say she was glowing. That she finally felt whole. And that if he had ever meant something good, then he was happy for that. Amanda smiled. She said yes, that at some point, he had been a good part. But now, she was whole, no longer needing missing parts. And with one last look, she said goodbye. She walked alone through the streets of that city, feeling the wind touch her face, her heart light. She knew that true forgiveness wasn't about absolving the other, but about freeing herself from the weight of holding grudges. And she had succeeded. That story had been hard, but it had also shaped her. Amanda was now a woman who not only survived, but who had built, from her own pain, a life of real meaning. And there was still more to come. Because life, even after a fall, always offers paths for those who have the courage to keep walking. Life continued with the disconcerting tranquility of someone who has weathered great storms. Amanda, now caught in a new phase of silent plenitude, observed her existence with a gaze that distinguished what was essential from what once merely occupied space. Her current relationship deepened unhurriedly, governed by a mutual respect that required neither promises nor theatrical oaths, but rather daily gestures of care and presence. She had learned that true love doesn't shout, doesn't suffocate, doesn't impose itself. It flourishes on the solid ground of freedom and conscious choice. Amanda no longer carried her scars as pain, but as invisible medals of a battle won with courage and dignity. Her career was taking new directions, and the play she adapted became a cult hit for its raw honesty. People came from far and wide just to hear her speak, to be inspired by her journey and, somehow, find shelter in the words she transformed into a shield for those who needed to move forward as well. But there was one specific event, scheduled for the end of that year, that would close a cycle with the delicacy and strength of a definitive full stop. Amanda would be honored at a National Literature Award ceremony, nominated by critics as the year's revelation. A stage, lights, and gazes, but this time not to expose her wounds, but to applaud the woman who emerged from them. During the same period, Gabriel, now far from the city where everything happened, was trying to maintain a new rhythm of life. He had isolated himself in a remote village, where he worked as a coordinator in an educational project for vulnerable youth. There, no one knew his past. There, he could be just a man trying to do the right thing. But not even distance saved him from the ghosts within. Sometimes, he saw Amanda's reflection in the expressions of the girls he counseled, saw in her the purity he betrayed, the love he didn't deserve. Guilt was no longer a constant punishment, but a silent companion. Time had taught him that not all losses are visible. Some dwell in what could have been and will never be again. During the wee hours, he wrote letters he would never send, conversations that would never happen, as a way to stay connected to his conscience. One day, during a community meeting, he heard a young woman tearfully recount that she had been betrayed by her boyfriend. He listened attentively, and for the first time, he spoke clearly about his mistake, owning up to the destruction he had caused in the life of someone who loved him. The girl looked at him silently, and then said, "You only understood when you lost. I can still get out of this before I lose myself." And there, Gabriel realized that perhaps his greatest legacy would be to help others avoid making the same mistakes he had. Clara, on the other hand, didn't find peace so easily. Moving abroad didn't bring the fresh start she'd hoped for. She worked temporary jobs, avoided deep connections, and withdrew into herself. She tried to start a new relationship, but couldn't sustain even someone's admiration for more than a few months. Every kind gesture reminded her of what she'd destroyed out of pride and envy. One night, alone in a cheap hotel room, she opened an old notebook where she'd written down, years ago, everything she admired about Amanda. She reread the compliments as if confronting her own downfall. She cried herself to sleep, and the next day, she began psychological treatment. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she decided not to spend the rest of her life being the shadow of the woman she destroyed. She got involved in social projects, studied psychology, and began giving lectures on guilt, forgiveness, and emotional responsibility. Years later, one of her lectures was cited by one of the journalists who followed Amanda's work. Even without knowing it, the influence that Amanda exerted continued to affect destinies. The award ceremony arrived. Amanda looked stunning, but without extravagance. Her new partner accompanied her with a look of quiet pride. As she took the stage to accept the award, she gave a short but truthful speech. She said that pain doesn't define us, but that it can push us to places of strength we never knew we had. That betrayal destroys not only marriages, but identities, trust, and entire futures. But that it is possible to rise from the ashes with dignity, as long as we have the courage to cut the threads that bind us to what killed us inside. The audience rose to its feet in applause. Amanda held the trophy with a serenity she would never have achieved had she chosen the path of revenge, bitterness, and hatred. She chose to rebuild. And for that, she won. Months later, during a visit to a school that had adopted her play as teaching material, Amanda was surprised by a nervous teenager who asked for an autograph and said that her mother had overcome an abusive relationship thanks to her words. Amanda smiled, hugged the girl, and replied, "Your mother is the true author of this story. I only wrote the foreword." At that moment, she felt that everything, absolutely everything, had made sense. As for Gabriel, one autumn morning, he received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of the play, with a simple dedication written by Amanda, so that you never forget what silence destroys. And what regret, alone, never rebuilds. He held the book to his chest and, for the first time in a long time, cried in a different way. It was a pain that no longer apologized, but accepted the consequences. The mature pain of someone who knows that certain losses are permanent, but who must carry on nonetheless. This story ends with each character heading in opposite directions, but all crossed by the same certainty: betrayal doesn't just destroy the other. It shatters what's most valuable within the perpetrator. And not all regret is accompanied by forgiveness, because some choices are crossroads of no return. Amanda was reborn, Clara confronted herself, Gabriel understood. And all, in their own way, learned that love, when betrayed, may not die. But it's never the same again. What about you? What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how you felt about this ending. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, it helps us continue bringing you impactful stories like this. And remember, betrayal destroys homes, dreams, and people. It slowly erodes everything that took years to build. On this channel, we do not support any kind of betrayal. The stories told here are fictions based on real emotions, with the aim of showing that destroying someone's trust is never a worthwhile path. Always choose respect, dialogue, and loyalty. Because love is, above all, caring.